and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. We are here on the sidelines of an international conference being organized by IGPP in collaboration with CSSS, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, Justis Leibeg University, Briesen, and German Research Foundation, Germany. The conference, Environmental Policy Discourses since the 1960s, Politics, Problems and Narratives of Environmental Policies in Europe and Asia, is an attempt to bridge narratives and inquire into the discourses of environmental policies that have governed Europe and Asia since the 1960s. Academicians, researchers, policymakers, and other experts are gathered in New Delhi, and today we have with us one of the chief organizers of the conference, Professor Detlef Breisen. Welcome, Professor.
I'm very happy to be here.
Professor Detlef Breisen is a social scientist and counselor who investigates contemporary global developments. He has worked closely with many global universities and is currently associated with Justis Leibeg University and German Academic and Exchange Services, DAAD. His academic interests lie in religion and politics, the rise of authoritarianism around the globe, and the higher education scene in Europe and Asia. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I'll begin with the conference. What made you think of interlinking media and politics with the question of environment?
Well, this is a question I'm dealing with quite a while. We had a conference a couple of years ago on the same interlinkage, means politics, media, and then we had religion. And then from that perspective of religion, we discovered that religion is very closely interlinked to the understanding of the environment. Say from a general perspective, that is, there are different ideas on the environment and religious systems, and then on the other hand, how religion is influencing environmental policies, for example, in a country like India. And from that we went from, say, religion directly to the environment, and so we could say this is a continuation of what we have done so far. So we see that more or less as a logic development of what we have researched for the last 10 years, and now we go ahead with environmental issues.
Okay. This conference is organized on a comparative perspective. Do you think that the priorities as society and economy and Europe and Asia differ, and hence their approaches to environmental policies also differ?
Well, if I look at the development in different Asian countries and in countries like Germany or France or the Netherlands, of course, there are striking differences, because the processes which countries like Vietnam or India in particular are encountering today are processes we had in Europe some 40 or 50 years ago. And so if we want to because I'm interested in societal structures, so I'm interested in how to see how these developments in different countries are taking place, under which conditions industrialization is taking place, and under which conditions environmental destruction is taking place. So the comparison really was something which was rather prevalent and obvious for us.
You have researched on this theme for several years now, so you are probably an expert.
Maybe.
Do you think politicians listen to experts, or like expert opinion have a difference on their priorities?
I think it is not something like a linear development that we can say in general politicians listen to experts and they don't listen to experts. It's depending, say, on the type of politicians. Some politicians do, some politicians don't do. And I think in generally politicians listen. If, say, experts are institutionalized in ministries and in other formats of governance, I think then indeed politicians have to listen to experts. But listening to experts is only one thing, but because, say, for example, in a country like Germany, it is not necessary that expert opinion directly influence political decisions. We have processes of consulting politicians in terms, for example, of political decisions relating to environmental policies, but this is not a must. But many politicians in the European context do it. They listen to expert opinions, because from these expert opinions, they take a part of the legitimacy.
What made you choose India as the destination for this conference?
Because India is so strikingly different from Europe. Yeah, so it's very simple. It is that I was working for quite a while in the US, and I was pretty bored about that because the US is so similar to Germany. Yeah, and then I was looking for a different field of research, and then I came to India for the first time, and I was fascinated. And at the same time, I was thinking that this is a wonderful research object for a European, because you see all these striking differences. It's not the same. It is not like going to Australia, for example, or going to Canada, or even going to some countries in South America. India is unique, and that's fascinating and a challenge at the same time.
You, in the conference, you read a paper on consumer panic as a factor in formulation of environmental policies. What are your experiences as a consumer in Europe?
Well, I have experienced all these consumer panics for, I would say, some 40 years now. And what my personal experience is, these consumer panics made me very skeptical about responding to panics, because we had quite a lot of panics because I've been talking about this issue, but not in an extended way. And you can say we had many more consumer panics, mad cow disease, for example. I have been talking just a little bit about the cholesterol phobia, but there are many more things, and most of these panics come and on the next day they go. But what they do in a very consecutive way is that they make us more aware of the problems of the environment and the problems of our nutrition in general. That's mainly the sense of that panics. So you can also call it scares. So we have all these food scares and food scandals in the last few years, or last few decades, and we also have all these environmental scandals during the last 50 years. But this is something, so scandalization really made people aware of environmental problems, because this is touching us directly. Many other issues related to climate, to environmental problems, for example, climate change, are by far too abstract. We cannot understand, because this is something which is happening on the global level normally, and maybe there's a warm winter, maybe there's even a hot summer, maybe we have a flood or something like that. This is not directly related to climate change. But if we look at, say, what is happening in our daily life, so in my garden in Germany, for example, now fig trees grow, these things we didn't have when I was a boy. So this is something I can realize, that there are changes happening, and these changes, unfortunately, for a country like Germany, are not even the worst ones. So our summer's getting hotter, our winters are getting warmer, and in total, the balance for Germany in climate change is not so worse as it is for many other countries around the world.
In Germany's domestic politics, the Green Party, the rise of Green Party has demonstrated that how climate change is important to German society. And that is something that is unique, even for, even amongst its neighbors. What do you think sets apart German society's attitude towards climate change from its neighbors?
I think climate change and climate change policies now is a common agenda for practically all German parties. And this is not something which is directly related to the success of the Green Party during the last elections in particular. I think rather that the electorate was, or people were looking for an alternative to 16 years of Merkel government. And so they were more or less looking for an alternative, and then they voted for the Green Party. But we know that not all the people who voted for the Green Party support many of the ideas of the Green Party. So we should rather understand that as an alternative to get rid of a government nobody wants to have anymore.
To talk more about European politics, Europe and US's politics, you have worked on studying authoritarianism and across the world. And we see that there has been a rise of far-right ideologies and political parties across the globe in recent times, and we can see this in the proliferation of right-wing groups, Christian right-wing groups in the USA, overturning of abortion rights. Even in Europe, in Italy, brothers of Italy won the parliamentary elections, and in France, President Macron was in a neck-to-neck race with a far-right conservative leader. What parallels do you see between the rise of conservative parties, far-right groups in Europe and USA?
I think it's simply not comparable. The situation in the US is very different from the situation in Europe, because if you look into the history of the system of parties in the US, the polarization they are now encountering was never like that before. So politicians from all different groups of the parties in the US, and practically there were only two, were interlinked. And so if you look, for example, at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, in many cases, many people within these party systems supported the same ideas. So that has changed for the last 30 years, most likely. And what is happening in the US is something I would call the South Americanization of the US. Because the US is becoming a party system which is more like that of other South American, Latin American countries, where you have the Colorados and the Blancos. So you have the conservatives and you have the conservatives, the Blancos and the Colorados, the Liberal Party. And this is happening in the US. So the US is clearly shifting away from being a European society. And this is mirrored in the development of the American party system. And for Europe, the situation is a little bit different, because in some countries there are no right-wing movement. And the real danger in the European context are the right-wing movements in Eastern Europe, in Poland and Hungary, and implicitly also in Romania and Bulgaria, former Yugoslavia, and so on. And then we have to be very careful to talk about right-wing political parties, because maybe I said that already at the conference. No, that was another conference. I said that, of course, you have, for example, in Germany or in France or in Italy, you have these very conservative groups, but we should not think that these are fascist groups. Maybe there are some fascists among these people, but normally they simply cover a rather conservative perspective, which the voters are obviously interested in.
When we talk of, you mentioned Hungary, Poland, and Slovenia, and there are studies, there's a report by International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, which says that the number of democracies that have backslided into authoritarianism have doubled in the past decade. It's very astonishing that even far-right leaders in EU, like brothers of Italy, have lent their support to Russia and its leader, and even Donald Trump did that, which the Russian regime, which many consider to be authoritarianism. Why does authoritarianism feel attractive to a significant part of the population, of the world population?
I think authoritarianism comes from the Latin word auctoritas. And auctoritas is something positive. It means competence. Yeah. So people are looking for competent leaders, and so each party has an authoritarian core. Even the Green Party in Germany has that, I think. But the problem is that you have fake authority. And that is, I think, that basically the characteristic of these parties which are now governing some European countries. So fake parties with fake authority. And my example always is not, say, Italy or France. My main example is, of course, Britain. Yeah, because there you have a right-wing party governing the country for many years, the so-called Tory party, which would be in the German context, for example, a very right-wing party indeed. And they are, I would say, they are pursuing something like a fake, an incompetent agenda under the name of having competence, being, say, equipped with auctoritas. So that is the problem. That's very attractive for many people because people want to have orientation. They're interested in that positive way of auctoritas, and then especially some group of the middle spectrum in the party system and the left-wing groups don't dare to say that they also have some authoritarian values as well.
You have also spent a lot of time in South Asia, which historically has reeled under many authoritarian regimes, which is in contrast to European societies who did not have to deal with many such authoritarian regimes. So because of the past experiences, do you find a difference in the societies, the European and the Asian societies' attitude, their support or their opposition to authoritarianism?
That's a very complicated question for me. I think that if you look at the European history, I think we have a long tradition of authoritarian regimes. And if it wasn't related to the mother country, if you look at colonialism is definitely authoritarian. And so there was, say, something like two sides of the medal. So for the external relations, countries like France, for example, were pretty authoritarian, or Britain in particular. And then they had some democratic structures already before the First World War. Or Germany had the same. So we had that fascist regime, only worked for a very short time, 12 years. And then for the first years after 1949, we had a rather authoritarian party government. So it was something like many countries in the world have experienced at the same time. It was development by some authoritarian elements. So Germany, after the Second World War, was not so terribly democratic as it is today. And I think that is also true for most of the European countries after the Second World War. So I think that if we say that we shift from one extreme to the other, it's very important to see, in my experience or in my opinion, that there is nothing like a linear development towards democracy. So these hypotheses of Francis Fukuyama, that there is something like an end of history and now we all go for liberal democracy, I think is simply not working. This is for the last 30 years, it has been proven again and again that is not true. And what is, say, the support for authoritarian governments in South Asia? I could also add East Asia, I could also add Southeast Asia. Most of the countries are not fully developed democracies. So if I look at Southeast Asia, I see hardly any. Even Singapore is not one. If I look at East Asia, China, of course, is not one. South Korea is, Japan has deficits, and so on. So I would say that it's rather common that democratization has a limit, and this is especially true for countries in Asia because they are confronted with many problems, problems which are sometimes so huge that people think that there is no other way like to be governed by a strong personality. And this is something which occurred in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia since decolonization. So I don't think it's so new for Southeast Asia. If you look at the Nehru government, the Gandhi government, I think if you look at the emergency, for example, there's a long tradition, of course, of authoritarian governance in India, and that could be repeated again and again and again. You also have phases of liberalization, of democratization, and then on the other hand, you have times when authoritarian approaches are by far more important.
Do you find that in South Asia as well, people are chasing what we would call fake competence?
Yes, I think that is a common thing for many countries, that people are trapped by fake competence. And I would say it is also the case for countries like Germany. It's not something which is only here in Southeast Asia. So if you look, for example, at the acting Minister of Economy in Germany, he had an interview on TV and he wasn't even able to explain bankruptcy. And that is something which is a rather bad sign of his competence, of his autoritas. No? So he couldn't explain what is a bankruptcy is. No? And that's one of the very basics of economic thinking. So
when we talk about rise in fundamentalism, do you think that women as a marginalized group bear the worst brunt of it, of the rise in fundamentalism and the leading fallouts?
Yeah, this is depending on the country, of course. I don't see that in European countries. I see rather the opposite, that women are getting stronger and stronger. And that even might be a threat for equality. So I don't see in countries like Germany or Sweden or Denmark, Netherlands, France, I don't see that women are the victims of these marginalization processes. Of course, it's different if you go to other countries. If you go to Turkey, to Iran, that's a pretty different kettle of fish. So, but the general picture, I wouldn't say, is that women are in general the victims. It's also in other countries, like in India, for example, it's very much depending on the social status of women. Huh? So, if women are victimized, then they come from the lower status of the society, from the low caste, from the marginalized people who are marginalized anyway. So, India was ruled by women for a very long time, but she was a Brahmin princess, so towering over 99% of all the men, of course.
True. When we talk about rise of fundamentalism and how people are chasing what you refer to as fake competence, do you think it's a reflection upon the failure of education system worldwide, that we are not able to differentiate between what is real and what is fake?
I mean, people today are flooded by information, and the good question is, how can you structure all the information, all the fake information which is reaching you? And I think for that, people indeed need a lot of competences to filter what is faked and what is not faked. And during linear TV, for the times of linear TVs, for example, that job was taken by the journalists. And now if you look at social media, for example, people simply can publish nearly everything, and there is no way to check whether somehow it's related to reality or not. And I think that's a big issue, because it's not possible that we introduce something like censorship to that entire thing, because I think it's a value as such that people can publish whatever they think is important. But it's also very complicated to deal with all these informations which are coming to us. And this is, for example, this became very prevalent during the Corona crisis, so during COVID-19, where on the one hand, there were many fake news about COVID-19, and on the other hand, in a country like Germany, there was a rather unreflected consensus that we must have these vaccination programs. Yeah, and many people who didn't want to be vaccinated were stigmatized. And now we are learning that the vaccinations have an effect, but the effect of these vaccinations is rather limited. So I think, and this of course is something which is due to due to social media. So people don't have the chance, or they cannot check, and then it's very complicated. Which authority, so which auctoritas you trust in and which one not. But in general, one more time, people want something like that. They want people, reliable people they can trust in.
So when people tend to go for these fake competence and fake sources of authority, some of them being important positions of power, especially when I look at leaders in Europe and US, they are rather well educated. They come from universities. So have the universities failed when the leaders are sort of propagating fundamentalism, or like they do not seem rooted in positive, tolerant values?
I think my dream was always organizing an assessment center for politicians.
That would be nice.
Yeah, you see that they have to prove their competences because before they can go for elections. But that of course is a contradiction to democracy, because everybody has the right to stand for elections. And then it's the question whom people believe in and whom people don't trust in. And I think we can see with Donald Trump in particularly that might cause enormous problems.
True. So it's surprising that you have exams for everything. You have to submit research proposals and whatnot, but to be a politician, you basically don't need anything. And you have worked with higher education institutions across Asia, Europe, and USA. And what do you think are their separate weaknesses and strengths? And what can they learn from each other?
Well, I can compare from my experience, say, education systems in the US, in Europe, and in different Asian countries. And each has its weaknesses and its strengths. So if you look at the US, for example, education is completely commercialized. Yeah, this is something which is rather bad because they have a system they call you pay, you pass. You enroll at the university, you pay your tuition fee, and then they will provide you with the diploma. This is one thing which is bad in the US, for example. What is good in the US is that there are some elite universities and they have big funds. Yeah. So if I look at Germany, for example, I would say we also have some very good universities which can compete with American universities. This is not a problem because they have sufficient funding. But on the other hand, we have the tendency in Germany, for example, which was also always so of its dual system of education, that we have by far too much students. More than 50% of the young generation now goes to university, and that is too much, and then they achieve rather worthless bachelor degrees. But at the moment, they all get a job because we have that demographic problem. So I think what I can see from my experience at German universities over the last 30 years, we see a decrease in quality. So not only for the graduates, but also for the teaching staff. If you take a country like Vietnam or like India, there you have the problem that most of the universities are rather badly equipped. Payment is better now compared to a couple of years ago. I'm learning that a university professor gets something like 1,000 to 1,200 euro per month. I think that's correct. If you go to Vietnam, they get 200 to 300 euro per month, but that's by far less. So in that case, there are not enough resources into the system. There are not enough resources in the system. This is one thing. And then I think that is the main reason for the sometimes rather low quality of
optimistic theme. Where do your hopes for a better world order lie? For better environment, better education, better politicians?
I think this is nothing new, but I think we need a multipolar world, and we should not have two superpowers now, like China and the US, competing on control over the world. But what we need is a balanced system of middle powers. And of course, we need state structures, because state structures can control globalization. I mean, that's a historical finding. It is not that we had the state first and then globalization, but we had globalization first. And the state is also already a response to globalization. So the nation state is a response to globalization. And of course, in the European context, it's not that we should re-establish the nation state, because the European states are too small for that. But we have something like a superstructure we might call the European Union. And I think in Southeast Asia, for example, we have a similar development with ASEAN. And India is a different example, because India is huge in itself, China is huge in itself, and America still I think is an important country. But we don't know what the future might bring. But I think that is something which might be balancing all the developments, which at the moment are not at the very best. So, but as I say, I believe in rationality, and I hope that people will overcome emotions, and that is very important in my perspective.
Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time.
Thank you.
I hope you had a wonderful stay in Delhi, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, my pleasure being here. I think it was a good interview today. Thank you very much.